Good afternoon. So today we are going to be doing a problem that is structured similarly to the final. So it's intended to give you sort of a glimpse of how you're going to be attempting to complete the final exam. Okay, so I've got it right here. Let me put it in the chat for you. And there's a little bit more. Scotty, please check your display name. So just put your full name up there. Okay, so Tom was the fee simple owner of Firefly, a beachfront villa. The villa also houses a bed and breakfast for tourists. In 2010, he told his niece Catherine that she could live with him at Firefly rent-free for as long as she desired, provided she assisted Tom with the cooking for the tourists and did the necessary repairs to the villa. Tom explained to Catherine that he was unable to pay her as much as she earned in her previous job. Catherine gave up her job as a live-in helper, which paid very well, and moved into Firefly. Catherine was afraid of burglars, so she installed a high-tech security system at Firefly. Tom was present when Catherine had the security system installed. Catherine also installed new windows to the guest rooms at Firefly because the old windows were damaged in a storm in 2013. The installation was very costly. Catherine had discussed these repairs with Tom before repairing the windows. At that time, Tom told her to go ahead. Tom sells the Firefly to Jim. Jim has served Catherine with a notice to quit the Firefly. Advise Catherine. So the first step in answering a question like this is to identify the issues in question, right? So you have to know what are the things that you are trying to answer. So the first question, right, sort of the first thing that you have to do is figure out what's the most important thing here. Sure. The question is, what's the most important thing here? In this fact pattern, what is the most important issue that Catherine has? Sure. Take a minute. Hi, Leanne. We are working through a problem question that I've posted in the chat. I mean, this is not how I would phrase it, but I think it's right. So I think that the way I would phrase it is, where's Catherine gonna live? Right? That's sort of the really important question. Now, there's sort of this disconnect where, like in the real world, most likely Catherine just goes, okay, and moves out because she doesn't have the time or the resources to fight this. Okay. But in the world of a property law exam, we can start we can build off the assumption that she wants to stay at the Firefly. She's prepared to fight to stay at the Firefly. And so we're trying to give her advice on whether and how she can stay at the Firefly. So you're absolutely right that the question you're being asked to examine is, what rights does Catherine have under these facts? In that you're trying to enable her to stay, or at least maximize the probability that she can stay. So so what rights does Catherine have on these facts? Like what is the nature of her occupancy? So what's the nature of Catherine's occupancy here? Okay, so what label do we put on that? what's missing before you go too far down the co-tenancy rabbit hole? What's missing to create a co-tenancy? Whether it's a tenancy in common or a joint tenancy, what is missing from the fact pattern? Don't need the unity of time for a tenancy in common. So I'm telling you now, there's something missing from both of them. What is it? Well, I mean, she's in possession, right? They're both living there. So it's not quite that. Joint tenancy is the conclusion. We're I right. What title does Catherine have? Well, that's the no. What title to Firefly does Catherine have? Monik, we're going to come back to your question in just a second, right? No title, right? So she has no. So if there's no title, then what legal interest can she have? Exactly. It's just a promise. There's no change on that. So we can't, because there's nothing in writing, we can't convey any interest in land, right? That's the statute of frauds. Okay. But what rights can you have that don't require you to have an interest in land? I'm not going to ask how old you are, Chris, but you see if I can phrase this in a different way that may jog your memory. Um, right, license, right? Monica is correct, right? That licenses grant you rights in relation to property that don't require you to own an interest. Okay, so Catherine's rights are classified as a license. What kind of license does she have? So remember, there are 4 types of licenses. Which one does she have? Well, why would you say that it's a bear license, Chris? I mean, Monica, these are all, you've now listed all of the types of licenses. And it can only be one. We can argue that it might be that's three actually. Well, it refers to three, right? Because you've combined two of them. So there's the bear license. What is a bear license? Consequent. Yeah. The consequent to interest. Yeah, that's okay. So what is a bear license?
Hi, sir. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello. Oh, so a beer license is no contractual term, so there is no like
Right.
obligation from the
You
person.
you didn't you didn't give anything to get this license. It's part of being out in the world that this license comes along. Okay. Um, so there's no you haven't given anything, and so you don't get much, right? You get the right to come in and look around in a store. You get the right to go into somebody's front yard and knock on their front door to see if they're home, right? You get the right to deliver the mail. So that's a bear license. What what is a license consequent to interest? What is a license consequent to interest? Now that's an interesting question, Chris. I would say, I mean, I guess my question would be, what about that situation, right? The right to repossess the vehicle that's on private property. What about that suggests that it's a license consequent to interest? Like, how do you get to that conclusion? Can you explain that? Okay, well,
Hi. Oh,
go ahead,
sorry.
Mom.
The reason why I said consequent to interest was because her interest there was to cook, I think. I think she couldn't stay unless she cooks. So that was the interest. But I mean, I could be wrong. Because I also saw that he said she could stay however long she wanted to. So to me, that seemed like a promise, which was, estoppel. But
Well, I mean, look, the license is like there's the unless it's a bare license, there's some sort of promise involved. So we've already decided that it's not a bare license. So there's definitely somewhere in the situation Tom's promise comes into play. Okay. Um, but the interest, right, in a license consequent to interest refers to an interest in land. So you have to have some sort of non-possessory interest in land. And we have not talked about non-possessory interests in this class. And we are not going to talk about non-possessory interests in any sort of detail in this class. That is a property two topic. But if you own a non-possessory interest, coming with that interest is a license that will allow you to give effect to your interest. So for example, um, okay. Um, so for example, right, um, the if you have a usufruct that gives you the right to collect fruit on a piece of property, that right to collect fruit doesn't really mean anything if every time you set foot on the property, you can get arrested for trespassing, right? Um, so that's what a license consequent to interest is. What is a license protected by estoppel? Okay. Tell you what, guys. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, Brittany. Oh, there you are. Yeah, yeah. So there's three elements to estoppel, right? Promise, reliance, and detriment. Okay. And do we have those on these facts? Do we have a promise? Yes, we do. Do we have reliance? Yes, we do. Do we have detriment? Yes, we do, right? Now, one thing that I want to flag for you guys is that detriment doesn't necessarily mean everything bad that happens, right? Detriment specifically refers to the trade-off that you make at the time of the promise. So in this particular case, right, these particular facts involving Tom and Catherine and Jim, the detriment is when Catherine left her job to move to Firefly and become a cook and repair person. Okay. The detriment is not when Tom sells Firefly out from under her and she's been told to move out. Okay, so that's something that I struggled with when I was in law school for a long time, and so I want to flag it for you guys so that you guys can sort of learn from my error, right? The detriment is what you do at the time of the promise, not the future harm that you're claiming justifies the estoppel later. Okay. Okay. Tell you what, guys. I don't feel like I have given you a fair opportunity to prepare for this conversation. So, well, I appreciate you saying that, Chris, but I think that this is, well, we're trying. But so the key thing is, right, that you guys should have an opportunity to think about these questions and ponder them and sort of prepare to have a conversation. And really what I should have done is I should have given this to you, a couple of days in advance, and that did not get done. So what I would like to do is I would like to break you guys up into a couple of small groups, take like 5 minutes to talk through this, and then we'll reconvene to continue the conversation as a group. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, and that's just going to be a few minutes. Somebody just dropped. I'm not sure who, but I'm going to give them just a minute to come back before we break into small groups. Since, as you guys recall from the last time we broke into small groups, if somebody drops out, they can't get back in. So we'll do that. In just a second. Okay. Okay, so I really hope that that was not a complete waste of time. But I wanted to give you guys your space and let you sort of talk about this amongst yourselves, and also, like, you know, well, let's just sort of be honest, complain about me, if that was necessary. But so we have something that could be a license by estoppel, right? I think you can also argue that there could be a contractual license, right? We have an agreement, mutuality of obligation, right? So that could also be a way to think about it. But in both of those cases, what remedy does Catherine have against Jim? Because remember, Tom is not the one telling her to move out. Jim is. So let's take it one at a time. With a contractual license, what contract does she have with Jim? Right. That's correct. That's absolutely right. There's no agreement with Jim. Okay. So what remedies does she have against Jim with a contractual license? At law, what remedies at law does she have with Jim? Well, if it's equitable, it's not at law, right? That's right. No contract, no legal remedy. Okay. So now let's look at the license by estoppel. Okay. If there's an estoppel here, what promise did Jim make? Don't overthink this. What promise did Jim make her? Go ahead, Monica.
He promised for her to live in rent free at Firefly.
Did Jim promise that?
To live with him at Firefly. I think so. Well, provided she assisted. Or Jim. Oh, sorry, no, Jim didn't make any promise.
Yeah, Jim made
Did
no
not
promise.
form.
So this is a danger, right? Yeah, this is a danger. You have to make sure you know who you're talking about. Okay, so Jim didn't make any promise, so there's no estoppel as it applies to Jim. So the issue is, how do we get Tom's promise or Tom's contract binding on Jim? And that's where we get into equity. Okay, equity says, look, it's not fair for you to have to just like drop everything and move out. Okay, particularly given, everything that you've put into this property. But equity can only go so far. So these are the cases in Professor Cotellini's book of the wife who has the family home sold out from under her, right? And she's not on the deed, so she doesn't have any rights. And the court says that equitably, the new purchaser has to grant her like a year's license, right? So these are the kinds of things where that equity can do in these contexts. Okay. So what questions do you guys have about all of this, or I guess about anything at all?
So I wanted to know if, because I know heirs cannot inherit under joint tenancy. So I wanted to know if there's an exception in Belize, or if that same thing goes, that heirs cannot inherit.
So the same rule, my understanding is that the same rule applies in Belize, that joint tenants cannot inherit. But, because Belize sort of has this very common doctrine of creating tenancies in common as in equity, then there's room for equitable interests to pass through inheritance. But the legal interest consolidates through the joint tenancy. But the surviving joint tenants would hold for the benefit of the tenants in common, including any heirs. So does that answer your question?
Yes, I have one more question also, but
okay.
after Rihanna, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so Rihanna, the rationale behind the conclusion is that because of Tom selling the property out from under Catherine, she essentially has no legal rights, right? She has, because her license is either sounds through a contract she has with Tom, or through an estoppel created by a promise from Tom. So she has no legal rights whatsoever. But she may have some equitable rights where equity will afford her some time, or possibly equity will afford her some money to compensate her for the money that she paid for the security system or the new windows. Or she may be entitled to, a year's license to sort of give her some time to get her affairs in order and move. So that's the rationale behind the conclusion. And there are some cases mentioned in Professor Cotellini's book related to people who had this kind of a relationship and had the property sold out from under them, and they're entitled to equitable licenses. Okay, so Monica, you had another question?
What is the difference between shares alike and equal shares?
There's no difference.
So it's the
They
same
both
thing.
they both create tenancies in common, because they're both words of separation. Okay,
Okay, thank
um,
you.
yep. The only way that a tenancy in common doesn't create equal shares is if there is evidence of different contributions to the purchase. So, so like some of the equitable situations, like making different sized contributions to the purchase price, or if the conveyance itself enumerates shares, right? So says A gets 50%, B gets 30%, C gets 20%. Then you have a tenancy in common with different share sizes. Otherwise, words of separation create tenancies in common with the same size shares. Okay, so does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great. What other questions do you guys have? Okay. Questions going once? Questions going twice? Okay, we're going to wrap it up here. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any confusions about the co-tenancy assignment. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care and bye.